14 South African National Defence Force members in the Eastern DRC last month has again put the spotlight on the leadership in the Defence Force. The soldiers, who were part of a SADC mission in the Eastern DRC, were killed during an ambush by M23 rebels targeting Congolese bases in the east of the country. That's in Goma specifically. Well, that is not the first time the SANDF's troops have suffered casualties during foreign deployments, but have these been needless deaths? In the latest piece that he's written, Craig Bailie from Bailie Leadership Consulting has questioned what this reveals about the state of South Africa's defence leadership. Craig is with us now to talk more, in fact, about his thoughts on leadership in the Defence Force. In a moment, Craig, welcome to eNCA. At a time of conflict, a time of crisis, where have the biggest gaps been in leadership on the South African end?
Hi, Thembekile. Perhaps before approaching that question, and I think especially for the sake of listeners, you referred a moment ago to leadership within South Africa's Defence Force. I think it's important to clarify that when we talk about defence leadership, we are referring to stakeholders, specifically leaders, beyond just those that exist within the South African National Defence Force. We are also concerned with leaders outside of the Defence Force, beginning with the Commander-in-Chief, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, all the way down to the commanders who are at the operational level in the DRC. So I think, when it comes to analysing, asking questions around why these 14 soldiers died, when seeking accountability, it's important to recognise who exactly we're talking about when we refer to defence leadership, and not just leadership within the Defence Force or what one might call the military leadership.
And just on the president, because he's the person you listed first, do you think that he's faced enough scrutiny, enough questions about what's happened in the Eastern DRC, the deployment itself, the reports about inadequate resourcing? We know those have been denied to an extent by the Minister of Defence, Angie Motshekga, and the generals. But has the president himself been made to answer enough about what's happened?
Yeah. Well, Thembekile, I think a big part or characteristic of servant leadership, which is really the lens I used when writing the article you referred to a moment ago, is the willingness and ability of leaders to be transparent about the mistakes they've made. Now, if we look at, or if we consider for a moment this notion of the decline of the SANDF, there's been a lot of evidence, including scholarly and journalistic evidence dating from as far back as 2012 about the decline of the SANDF. Many red flags have been raised. And so when one asks, has the president done enough? I think the immediate and informed answer, the short answer, must be no. Given the state of the SANDF, one has to question whether our soldiers, South African soldiers, should be in the DRC in the first place. I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize that in principle, it is a good thing to want to help establish stability in countries or nations where stability is required. I think especially in a globalized world, especially the ease with which people are able to travel between countries in Africa for reasons we don't need to discuss now. And although that might be a noble and admirable cause, one has to ask whether our soldiers have been properly equipped to do the job.
And just on that note, we had a very interesting conversation, I think a day ago, with Songezo Zibi, who is a member of parliament, who was saying ultimately even the legislators, the MPs, members of parliament, have failed the Defence Force because the budget comes before parliament every year and they have approved it. So they too have played a role in the failure to make sure that the country's military runs at the best capacity, the highest capacity possible.
Thembekile, yes, like I mentioned, several leaders, many leaders at different levels. The defence budget certainly is a key question. It's been hotly discussed and debated for several years now. I don't deny that the defence budget should be necessarily or should be increased. But I think the deeper, more important question is, what has the SANDF and the Department of Defence and Military Veterans more broadly done with the money already at its disposal? In 2022, for example, it was found that, I need to remember my figures here, more than 2 billion was at least, it was found that there was defense corruption and fraud to the value of more than 2 billion. More recently, in 2024, South Africa's Auditor General found that there was more than 15 billion against irregular expenditure and more than 400 million against fruitless and wasteful expenditure in the DoD. So while the defense budget is something that needs to be discussed, while I'm sure many people have been asking for and desire an increased budget allocation for defense, I think the deeper and more important question is how faithful have defense leaders been with what they've been given until now?
And lastly, Craig,
those findings of South Africa's Auditor General indicate that there's a lot of room there for questioning. And
lastly, very briefly, if you can, what sort of leadership will the Defence Force need going forward?
Well, I think, as I indicated in my article, primarily servant leadership. And what servant leadership does is it puts the interests of followers first and foremost, or front and center, in leadership thinking and behavior. And Thembekile, I think, in light of the 14 soldiers who fell in the DRC, it's highly questionable, given the nature of South Africa's civil-military relations for many years now, whether defense leadership has in fact applied a servant leadership outlook to its leadership.
Craig Bailie, good to talk to you from Bailie Leadership Consulting. Great to talk to you. And by the way, just speaking to Craig about leadership in the SANDF, we are getting some breaking news, in fact, regarding the South African troops who are in the Eastern DRC, well, who've come back, in fact, from the Eastern DRC. An unconfirmed number, I'm told, have now arrived back in the country. This morning, we were told, some reports saying 3 of the critically wounded soldiers had been taken to one military hospital. Moloko Mrototo is our reporter who's on this story. He's got that breaking news for you at the top of 5 with Shahan and the team who've got the lead. Bye-bye.